Joy from Onyx Pages, and I'm really excited because I have Jaz Joyner with me. And if you saw my gushy review of Juniper Leaves, then you'll know that I absolutely loved the book, and I am thrilled to have the opportunity to spend a little time with Jaz to talk about Juniper Leaves and just to talk about their take on lots of different things. I prepared some questions. So Jaz, thank you very much for sharing some time with me.
Yeah, of course.
So my first question is a really basic one. Who are you? If you could tell us a little bit about who you are in whatever way you'd like to.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll start with where I grew up. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. So I am a Southern person, but I, up until recently, didn't like describing myself as that. Maybe it's the whole like not wanting to connect to the place that you were from. But I'm embracing that more now. I've moved back to the South. I live in Louisiana and New Orleans now. And I'm allowing that to be more a part of my identity, especially when I write, because I do think that it's relevant and important to talk about a queer person from the South specifically. But I've been writing since, I would say, more in depth when I was in college. I graduated around 2012. And I started my book right after I graduated. Took me 6 months to write the first draft, and then 5 years later, I published it while I was living in New York. I lived in New York for 5 years, took that whole time to work full-time and then part-time working on my book. So throughout that time, I was figuring out my queerness, and the book changed as I learned more about myself. The characters became more queer as I learned more about myself. Initially, yeah, Juniper was queer, but I wasn't going to really include it. It was just going to be this kind of thing that the author knows, but I started letting that be more a part of the story as I grew. And I've been writing full-time at a few different places, and now I'm just doing freelance, focusing on doing my next project for myself. Not sure exactly when I'll finish that. I'm kind of letting myself take my time since I've had this recent move back to the South, learning to take it slow again. But yeah, that's about where I am right now.
Cool. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I feel like I want to just be true to the list, although I am interested. I'm very intrigued, and maybe we can get to it, but I'm very intrigued by how the characters developed as you did. You know, we chatted a little bit before the interview started about Afrofuturism, and you know, queerness for me is so central to Afrofuturism, to the birth of Afrofuturism, and to the type of Afrofuturism that I'm attracted to, which is why I was so excited to hear about Juniper Leaves and then to read it, because I'm constantly looking for own voices, queer Afrofuturist writing, which in my view you've done, which leads me to my next two questions, which is, what is Afrofuturism to you? If it's a thing, what is it to you? And do you consider Juniper Leaves to be an Afrofuturist novel?
Well, I guess I'll start from the last question. I didn't write this book thinking of it as an Afrofuturist book. I wrote it, I guess I wasn't thinking of that term, but of course I do think that it's an Afrofuturist story. But I wrote it with the idea of, one, I never really see science fiction or fantasy, or up until, you know, the past maybe 5 years, I haven't seen Black people in the forefront of that. And that was really frustrating for me, because I loved fantasy growing up. I loved like The Neverending Story and all the Miyazaki films, right? Like, yeah, I really enjoyed those things, but I didn't see myself in them. And I always thought it would be so amazing if there were a Black character here. Like, I can see myself writing something like that. So I had that in mind, but I wasn't thinking like, I want this to be Afrofuturist. But I think it's definitely an Afrofuturist story, because not only are Black people in the front of this like magical idea, they're also thriving. They're also just existing as Black people. They are the center. There are no significant white or non-Black characters. And I think that that's very central to an Afrofuturist story. So yeah, I would say it's an Afrofuturist book, but I wrote it thinking, well, I would like to see myself in a fantasy story, and it became Afrofuturist.
So why did you, I mean, you sort of just answered that a little bit, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what what prompted you to write Juniper Leaves. You said that you had just finished college, and then it took you 6 months to write the first draft of it, and then 5 years. I'm really curious about that leap in time, but like 5 years to craft it into what we now have access to read. But what was it that what else was it that prompted you besides, if anything else besides that desire to sort of see yourself reflected in a story?
Um, it's funny, but I would say this whole journey started when I was about 8. I wrote this story that's eerily similar to Juniper Leaves, um, and it was inspired by Alice in Wonderland. And I thought that story was so fascinating, and I always wanted to go to other worlds. I always wanted to, like, I used to truly believe that, other realms exist. And I mean, scientifically, that's still, arguably something that exists. But I always dreamed of being a part of other worlds, especially being a queer, closeted Black queer person. To me, going to another world where that was okay was very powerful to me. So this kind of story was brewing in my head for, I'd say, 20 years. And when I finally graduated and I had the time to think about things other than school, I thought, okay, I want to write this story. I haven't seen it yet. I've been waiting for it. I want to be the person that writes this story. Um, so that's kind of how it came about. And then over the 5 years, I'll kind of go into how it became more queer. I thought, I wanted to see this magical story, but I also wanted to be true to my experience. So how can I make it closer to, I kept thinking, like, if I had seen this as a closeted queer person, how quickly would I have come into myself if I had seen a story like this? So I wanted to be that for, other teenagers that are like me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, I'm no longer a young person, young at heart, but not a young person. But I really appreciate it, and I think that if I had access to stories like Juniper Leaves when I was younger, I may have come out earlier, and I may have had ways to kind of understand my feelings, because I know that I certainly know that I learned that certain physical characteristics were good looking. Like, I learned those things as I read books, right? Because I read people talking about like different shades of blonde, for example, and I learned the different shades of blonde because I was reading Babysitter's Club and
Mm-hmm.
Sweet Valley High, as I told you. And so I was getting all of this information while my own ideas that were true to my own experience were coming through. And so, yeah, I'm really thankful. So how did you approach the world building? So you mentioned The Neverending Story, which is my favorite fantasy movie. Um, and I watched it like many times as a kid. I've never read the book, but I absolutely loved it. And actually, when I was reading it, there were moments where I was just like, "This, there's something about this that sounds so similar
Mm-hmm.
to me, in terms of like the our world needs you, our world, there's this other world out there, and this world needs you to survive. It needs you to believe in it. It needs you to make a choice, to allow yourself to move from this world to another world. And that just reminded me of The Neverending Story, even while I was reading it. So it's interesting that it was one of the films that you really liked. But how did you approach the world building?
Well, I'm a very visual person. Of course, like The Neverending Story, a lot of fantasy films were an inspiration for this book. Because when I think of building, I'm always thinking of how would I want to feel reading this? How would I want to? It's kind of like a roller coaster for me. Like, how would I want this roller coaster to feel? When do I want it to drop? When do I want it to,
Mhm.
have twists and turns? So everything is visual. I like when I think of the forest and the woods that I put in the story. A lot of that is like inspired by me going on nature walks, inspired by um, me loving to be in the woods when I was growing up. Like a lot of that, when I'm writing, I'm thinking like, you know, they say write what you know. Everything that I visualize there is something that maybe I've had a dream about, something that I've actually been to. Just side note, like I had the story originally set in Scotland for some reason, and I thought, I don't know anything about Scotland, never been there. I need to, you know, that's the whole thing. Like that goes into the like, you know, wanting that proximity to whiteness that I was veering away from. But yeah, the world building became like, this feels so true to me, and this is such a um, comfortable idea of nature. I want to include this. And then from that came, well, what kind of world would I want to go to? And then it became that. So I love being outside, and I wanted that to be a big part of it. That's why so much is outside. I'm just like, well, I love the outdoors, but how can I make the outdoors even more interesting?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
A book that I loved as a kid was Charlotte's Web. And so I had Charlotte's Web type feelings as well when I was reading it, and it just brought back, like as I was reading this, it just brought back memories a lot about my childhood and reading and my love of reading as well. So you take an intersectional view. Your characters are very so obviously intersectional, and I'm specifically talking about race and sexual orientation and gender identity. And I'm wondering about what the feedback has been that at least you're aware of in light of that intersectional approach that you've taken to characters.
Well, actually, I haven't gotten too much too much response about any other character but Juniper, which I find really interesting.
Oh.
There's a lot of focus on her kind of like ambiguous queer identity. A lot of discussion about how she is queer, but she doesn't have to say that. A lot of people are appreciative of that. But I don't get so much response about, like, say, her mother or her dad being a scientist. Actually, no, I would say like the actual science in the book has been a big part of why people love it so much. Yeah, but it's still more focused on how that speaks to Juniper, not so much the other characters.
Were there things that you were hoping to accomplish with your insertion of the other characters that you want to talk about? Because I would love to talk about the other characters, because I enjoyed the other characters, and there were certain scenes that I really appreciated, like Bree's friends and the community that they created. They're kind of badass, but also super smart and aware, and they read to me as young people, but there is also a wisdom in them that I really appreciated. Like they looked out for each other, but you could tell that they were really close. And also there was such a comfort in queerness among that group. Yeah, I was reminded of myself when there were scenes when Juniper starts to meet Bree's friends, and she's looking around going, what do I do? Who are these people? What are they like? And they're weird, but I'm strangely drawn, and I'm okay with being drawn. And how do I deal with that? The beach scene was awesome and cute, and yeah, so I really enjoyed them. What were you hoping to accomplish when you introduced those secondary characters?
Yeah, a lot of that came from inspiration from my brother is 8 years younger than me.
Okay.
So he's of, I think, what is it called? The Generation X or Y. Something that really inspires me about that generation, about seeing teenagers now, is they don't discuss queerness. It's fine. Like no one cares. It's not a big deal for a lot. I wouldn't say for everyone, but from what I've seen, a lot of things are unspoken, and they seem, I don't want to say more wise, but they have more understanding of the world, probably because of the incorporation of the internet and technology. So I wanted to incorporate that in the story because I feel like that's true to a lot of kids today. There's just so much just understanding and acceptance of people as they are. Um, and I wanted to, because I one thing that really bothers me about a lot of stories about young people and about teens is kind of the dumbing down of the characters just because they're younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's how kids are. I don't think that's how teens are. I think we got to give them some credit. They're smarter than that. So I tried in every scene, I was thinking like, how would I be feeling as a teen in this book? But also let me modernize it because I didn't have the information that kids have today. So how would I, like, if I had like Instagram or an encyclopedia online or Wikipedia or something, how would I think of the world now?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was really important to me to not to give teens credit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you, I did not tell you that I wanted to ask you this. I'm just thinking about that now, but I'm starting to read a little bit more YA. I typically don't read YA, but I have a newfound appreciation for it. And one of the things that I find really interesting is how we deal with violence in YA. Because I think, as you were saying, with the introduction of the internet, which I didn't have when I was the age that your main characters are, um, I couldn't, watch a bullying scene over and over and over on YouTube, or um, I didn't have to deal with, police violence in the way that as an adult, I'm looking at it and thinking about it. And there was a little bit of brutality, a little bit of violence that sort of cropped up in different ways in the story, like the potential for it and the tearing away of worlds. And so how did you decide whether or not you would insert images or violent images into the story, and how you would have your character deal with them?
um that was actually a really tough that was really tough for me to approach because I didn't want a story that was so blatantly violent. I actually wanted to promote non-violence, even though there was a war happening. Like the way that she won the war was by talking and not fighting. That was very intentional. But I also wanted it to reflect the reality of a lot of pushback or a lot of rebellion does require some violence.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be honest with that. I didn't want it to be too like fluffy, like her character is very positive and very uplifting, but I also wanted to be honest with the fact that when you are fighting for a community or fighting for a world, it's not going to be this just, well, I'm going to just, imagine that things are better and they're better. So
Yeah.
I reluctantly included some violence just to be true to how it probably would have to be.
Yeah. And I liked it. I liked how you did it. um I really appreciated it, and it really contributed to the sense of urgency that surrounded her, all the characters, but mainly Juniper and Bree. And there was a tension there for me between the secret. I mean, I don't want to give too much away, so I'm trying to also speak a little generally. But uh, when you've got a war, you've got something that you need to participate in that you're aware of, but a whole bunch of people aren't. Um, how do you behave, right? Like, you've got to keep a secret, but you also have to save the world's. So how do you do that? And isn't that such a question, outside of fiction, right? Because even in my own life, there are things that are around me that are urgent that people around me don't see as urgent, right? And that
Yeah.
my choices and their choices are so important, but we're not actually talking about the urgency in the ways perhaps that we should. So that tension of like, yo, like, we gotta go. Like, we gotta get there, time is moving, and if we
Mhm.
don't, we could miss the opportunity to do something great. And but I can't tell you that. So anyway, yeah, that's I really love Juniper Leaf. So let me just so now we're sort of at the lightning round where I just ask you questions about about the book, and I'm really interested in your own favorites. So what was your favorite scene? And for those of you who are watching, we're going to get into actual spoilers. So if you want to pause the video, that's good. That's cool. Thanks for watching. Love you. So what was your favorite scene to write?
Well, you mentioned this earlier, but the beach scene was my favorite scene to write.
Yeah.
And that's one of the scenes that over the 5 years didn't change very much, because I immediately visualized the euphoria that I had when I would go to, like, I didn't live near a beach, but the euphoria I would have when I would go to the beach at night is something I will always remember. And I immediately was just like, if I want to present her being free, I think this is the best way that I could do it. And that's what that scene symbolized to me, is her realizing I'm allowed to feel free. I'm allowed to be myself. I'm allowed to do what I want to do. And the water is sort of symbolic of that. So yeah, that's my favorite scene now for sure, because it's just, I feel free when I write it, or when I wrote it. Yeah.
The talking pig.
Oh yeah, Charlotte's Web. Yeah, I love that book so much, and I was just like, how can I not include this? I know it's cheesy, I know it's corny, but I have to include it. If they're going to the uniform, they have to have a talking pig. It's just like, it has to happen. So that's what that was.
Because I read it and I wrote Charlotte's Web, right? And I was like, I have to ask Jazz about Charlotte's Web, because I also felt it was like, I felt that it was a message through the text to those of us who aren't young reading it, being like, I got you. It's Charlotte's Web. Like, it's okay that you're, not in your 20s.
Right.
That's good. I see you over there. So I appreciate that. The adults. So, what was the hardest, like, which character of the adult characters, which character was the hardest for you to write, and why?
The fathers were the most difficult for me to write. And I'll preface this with every character that I made, I wanted to challenge gender norms. That's why one of the dads is a cook. That's why one of the moms is a scientist. That was very intentional. I didn't want, the typical sort of like, I think especially in conservative Black families, there is this expected way for Black mothers and Black fathers to be. So it didn't start out that way. That's one of the things that kind of developed over time. But for me, the fathers, specifically Juniper's dad, was the most difficult thing, because I wanted him to be a loving, kind figure. And not that I didn't grow up with that, I don't think that it's a part of Black culture to have a father the way she does, even though I think that it definitely exists, more so than we give credit for. But I didn't know how to present that. Like, the first edits of the book, I think the dad was a little too harsh. And I kept, like, when I would write the dad, I would think, like, this sounds great. And then I would have someone read and they're like, this scene sounds really like the dad sounds kind of mean. I was like, really? And I think in writing, sometimes things come off a little more brash than they are in reality, because when you're describing something with words, you're not always able to show the feelings, the same with texting. Like, you write a joke and in your head, it's like, super funny, but the tone is different in the text. So that was really tough for me to just find the balance of, okay, I want this dad to be loving and interactive, but how do I take away the edge of what I know dads to be like? Right. I had to be extra sugary sweet with the dad in writing than I would think of a dad being in real life.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that was tough for me.
Favorite sentence?
Oh, I don't know if I remember any sentences.
I'm looking at my copy.
I would think, I mean, this is a super spoiler, but the spoiler. Okay. I would say the last scenes, I'm just paraphrasing, but how she like read the guy to just like disappear, like
Yeah,
that whole scene for me.
yeah,
I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I meant for it to be a read. Like I meant for it to be like, I am just talking you down until you literally don't exist anymore. So
I
I would say
love
that's my
that.
favorite.
I
Yeah.
love that. I'm trying to find it, but I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to use words instead of, because the same thing goes with like I wanted an anti-war kind of plot, but I wanted it to be like really kind of badass, just like I can talk you away kind of thing.
Yeah. Um, I struggled to stand. Once I had my footing again, I said, "You're afraid of powers you didn't even know I had." I was starting to feel stronger again. I spoke louder. "You're afraid that I will make you small as you are inside." He was still laughing, but right in front of me, he shrank. I couldn't just be seeing things. He was smaller than he was only seconds ago, if only by a little. He charged toward me again and knocked me to the ground. Pain bloomed inside. I kept speaking. "You're nothing but a joke who I will defeat, and then you will be nothing." His laughter faded, and he picked up a knife from a table beside him. "You are nothing," I yelled from the ground. I pulled myself up again. I spoke with every bit of intention. I didn't let his newfound weapon scare me. "You are nothing, and you've never been anything. This war will end, and you begging me. It will end with you begging me to pity you." He shrunk more and more. He shrunk right before my eyes. His eyes grew big with fear. He watched his hands shrink, and I could smell the fear floating off him and enveloping the room. The smaller he got, the closer I came, and the less my heart pounded. Like I read that, and I thought of our political leadership, and I thought about what happens when we do speak, and um, and the power, and just her getting bigger too, right? As he gets smaller. That was it gave me chills reading that. And yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Um, okay, so that was my lightning round. I want to just sort of get away from Juniper Leaves for a minute and ask you what's giving you life right now. So, are you reading things that are interesting to you, or watching things, or listening to things that you find inspiring?
Yeah. Pose is a great show that I'm watching. That I mean, the season ended, but that's my new favorite thing. Also, right now I'm in this whole nonfiction phase,
Hmm.
and that usually happens when I'm starting a new project. Like I want to be inspired by the world that, like the real world that's happening. So I recently read The Cooking Gene by Michael Twitty. He calls himself a culinary historian, and he talks about like the Black American history through food, which is fascinating. I recommend it. It's a really good book. Um, and right now I'm reading Unapologetic by Charlene Cup. I don't remember her last name, but she's the leader of the Black Youth Project. Um, and I'm trying to find where I fit in within the Black movement. And I'm trying to find kind of where I can incorporate my writing with that, my like fiction writing.
Hmm.
Um, so I usually go into these kind of like little hermit stages where I read nonfiction, and then I go back to things that are my favorites, like, a lot of movies that I like to watch. And then usually I get inspired at that point, I start writing. So that's kind of where I am right now. I'm brewing. But the last fiction book that I read that I really loved was Kindred. Um, it took me a while to get to that book because I heard about how stressful it is to read. And it was very difficult to read, very painful to read. I think I even cried at some moments. Um, but yeah, that was a really inspiring book. I think about it all the time.
Yeah. Have you read the graphic novel version of it?
No, I haven't. Actually, I should put that on my list. Yeah.
Yeah, I've reviewed it on the channel. It's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, it's not easy. But it was. I needed to read it. It was an experience. It wasn't easy. So
Hmm.
yeah, but I think I definitely appreciated. I appreciated it. Um, if people want to get in touch with you, if they're curious about the book, I mean, different folks have different ways of engaging with readers. Are there particular ways that you like to engage with readers, or would prefer to engage with readers if they have questions about the book, or they just want to gush about it, or anything like that? What works for you?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter, so if anyone has a Twitter, I'm always open to talking on there. My DMs are open on Twitter. A lot of people do interact with me on Twitter about Juniper Leaves. Also, my email address, it's on my website. I'm fine with people having it. It's like specifically for Juniper Leaves things, jaz@jazjoyner.com. Um, so yeah, I've gotten a few emails recently from people, actually young people. The last email I got was from a girl named Juniper, was just like, I've never seen anyone have my name before. And I just wanted to say that that's really cool. And that's why I read the book. I was just like, wow, that's awesome. Yeah. But yeah, so email and Twitter, I would say, are the best ways.
Okay, I'll put those in the description of the video, so to make it easier for people to get in touch with you. So I am at the end of my questions, and I just want to thank you again. Thank you for a lot of things. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for taking the time to make sure that it reflected what you were looking for, and thanks for the contribution that you've made. I bought Juniper Leaves a long time ago, and I wanted to make sure that I read it at the right time for me, and I did. So I just really loved it, and I'm thankful to the people who supported you, and to get you into a place and to hold space for you to put this book out in the world. So thank you to you, and thank you also to them. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time today with me to do this interview. So
Yeah,
I'm done. If you'd like to say anything out to the people in BookTube land, here's your chance. But I'm gonna let you have the last word.
yeah. I'm thankful that so many people are responding so positively to this book. And even if I'm not getting positivity from it, I like that people are interacting. I like that it's promoting discussion. Um, my only hope is to be a part of the discussion. I think that's happened, and I'm thankful for that. And I'm constantly inspired by queer Black people, and I am thankful to be able to interact even more because of this book. So hopefully people read it, and get something from it, anything from it. If it helps even one person that was my age, 16, hoping to see someone like this, then that's really all I could ask for. So.